Having said that, the stage is also ready for the very first keynote address for the day and for the event. And this is going to be a pertinent topic. Today I think the one exercise that we all do when we use technology is to hit the refresh button. Anything goes wrong, we'll see the first troubleshooter device is to refresh. So we think the same needs to be applied in every other practice, and therefore we are here to now discuss how to reinvent to succeed. In order to introduce and invite the speaker, let me first invite on stage the anchor for this session. He is partner of Fragomen India. He holds 20 years of experience in human resources and global immigration. Let's welcome on stage the very proactive Mr. Saju James. Please, sir, hearty welcome to you.
Good evening, all of you. It's my absolute privilege to be here today and to have my close friend, Rajesh Nambiar, who is well known in the IT industry here as keynote speaker. Rajesh and I worked together for many years in TCS, probably early 90s and until 2006. Rajesh started in Ooty in his early schoolings and completed his post-graduation in statistics from Indian Statistical Institute, Calcutta. Later on, completed his master's from Harvard University. Rajesh and I worked together while in TCS from 1990 to 2006. Again, the topic of the day, Reinvent to Succeed. We have been watching Rajesh from the side, the way he's conducted himself and grown within the organization. I know Rajesh from his Sega days, that is the Switzerland project which he did, and everyone who was associated with the Switzerland project has reached who's who of TCS. And remember him at RDS in Washington, where he was part of a large engagement in Washington. And I know Chandra, who is now the chairman of Tata Sons, was his partner and his roommate in Washington. And then I saw Rajesh moving into Fidelity as an account manager in Boston. And then the biggest change I've seen in Rajesh is when he moved to Minneapolis as resident manager and regional manager for the US operations of TCS. That was the first time TCS had a regional manager, resident manager in Minneapolis. With a 50-member team, Rajesh started. And during those days in the IT industry, there was no support functions available for anyone who was running a business. It was more or less like an entrepreneurial function. Rajesh started with a 50-member team, and I remember business development, HR, service delivery, managing people movement, all of that was the responsibility of a resident manager. Starting at a 50-member team by the time Rajesh came out of Minneapolis. It was the largest account of the region for TCS with a couple of large engagements won. And that was all Rajesh. Again, TCS didn't stop there. He was also responsible for setting up the Hyderabad operations for TCS. Started the new building and expanded it too big. And then moved back to the US as regional director for the New York, New Jersey operations. And that's when the turn happened. It's almost the same time, both of us. I was in the US as the head of HR for the US operations, and Rajesh was heading the Eastern region. I heard that Rajesh was coming back for a big opportunity. That was when he was moving back to India as the head of IBM Global Delivery Center and managing director for the India operations. I moved more as an entrepreneur to the Kochi location. Rajesh was here in India heading 90,000 employee strength of IBM, and he was also responsible at some stage to move to Singapore within the IBM operations to head the regional operations. Rajesh didn't stop there. He was also the chairman of Sienna after IBM, and then now again as chairman and managing director for Cognizant in India. So with that, Rajesh, I wanted to also talk about his presence in Cochin, Kerala. It's not known too much. Rajesh is also a board member at the OEN entity in Kerala. Rajesh is also an executive council member at NASSCOM. He is also a board member of US-India Business Council. So with that, I would request Rajesh please to take over and address the gathering.
Good afternoon. No response? Yes. Sometime. Thank you, Saju, for such a generous introduction, I must say, because now I have to live up to all those nice things he said, So that's harder than, potentially sort of, doing many other things, I must say. First of all, thank you. Thank you for inviting me to this, and this is such a wonderful forum, ability to sort of address a bunch of entrepreneurs mostly. It's not that every day you wake up and then do this. And I really have a fascination for entrepreneurs. I wasn't one. When I grew up, my mother wanted me to sort of get a job, right? So didn't realize that entrepreneurs create jobs, which takes a lot of guts for people to be entrepreneurs. Saju, you've been one, very good. I mean, I think this is just fantastic as to what it takes to be an entrepreneur. All of you, most of you are entrepreneurs. Some of us, really don't have the in it as for us to be an entrepreneur. But as Saju was saying, sometimes you also find that in large corporations, you almost create an entrepreneur in a little bit different, of course, from putting your own money versus your company's money in some sense. But nevertheless, it is an entrepreneurship. And then some of the stuff that we can talk about is how you could potentially create the culture of entrepreneurship, if you may, within organizations. And some of the companies have done it really well, and some of them are trying to do some of that, and we can talk about that as well. So, as somebody was saying, we will talk about this reinvention as a trait for any organization. We have seen over several years organizations which have started very small and become really big. Of course, we see that every day. I mean, if you look at, again, I'll come to the IT industry example in a second, but even other industries, you'll find that a lot of organizations have really been successful over the lifespan or over several years. But we've also seen organizations who've been extremely successful at one point in time, but then have really not made it beyond that. And so they've failed over a period of time as well, unfortunately. So you have some statistics. So S&P 500, if you take, and then look at the list, 50% of the S&P 500 list actually dropped out in the last 10 years, which means that people who have been in the list of S&P 500, most of you know what it is, right? They're no longer there today, right? The average lifespan of a company in S&P 500 is 18 years, as opposed to, 50, 60 years over a period of time, but recently the lifespan is just 18 years, right? So which means that companies don't stay successful for too long. That's what I want to talk about. Why do companies don't stay successful for a longer period of time? Fortune 500, same thing, 1955, the list was formed. Now, less than 12% of the companies which were in the first list of Fortune 500 are in the list today, which means 88, right? 100 minus 12, I suppose. 88% of the people are no longer in the list. So what makes companies don't stay successful? That's what we want to talk about. So I believe organizations need to, for organizations to thrive, they need, of course we all know that they need competitive advantage, right? I mean, I don't think anybody in this room will question, why organizations need a competitive advantage or not. But the key is, these competitive advantages don't last forever, right? I mean, there is a reason why it's called competitive advantage, and then the moment your competition sees the competitive advantage, they can replicate the same thing. So the idea is so now how do you create sustainable competitive advantage? It's a new name for it. So you create a competitive advantage for yourself as a company, and then try to see if you can sustain it, not forever, but at least over a period of time. So companies have kind of learned to not just create a competitive advantage, but also sort of create a little longer sustainable competitive advantage. Now, the challenge is the competitive advantage is also being challenged by forces which are external to you, forces that are internal to you, within the company, outside the company, changing behavior of the market, changing behavior of your customer needs, changing behavior of what the customer is expecting from you, advancement in technology, and last but not the least, you'll also have forces such as, or external events, such as the pandemic, the way, what it does to you as a company, is to challenge your sustainable competitive advantage that you thought was good enough for you to sustain as a company. So remember, I was sort of telling about why companies don't stay successful for too long, whether it is small or big. It's because your competitive advantage is no longer sustainable. It's neither sustainable nor competitive, and that's why these forces tend to be dealt with. So what makes companies stay, or what makes companies deal with or stay with the competitive advantage for longer? I want to argue that the ability to reinvent would be a trait or a quality that the companies will have to possess for organizations to become, to continue to be enjoying the competitive advantage. So let's talk about a little bit on that. So what does it even mean, right? So reinvention, in my mind, is about creating, of course, this competitive advantage. Is it a new product, new offering? It's all, looking at your revenue, understanding your customer base, and the ability for you to sort of really, go back and see what you were doing before and see if that's the right thing for you to do even going forward. So broadly, we will talk about the reinvention in business models, kind of captures most of what we want to say. Maybe reinvention around the processes that you have in the company and what you do for your customers and so on and so forth. Third, reinvention of talent, because I believe that reinvention by itself, by definition, you start from yourself and then the talent that you have in the company. So business models, process, and talent, are you really able to reinvent some of that? Again, reinvention is not a one-time activity, and of course you do need continuous reinvention for you to succeed. Now, we have multiple examples of companies which failed to reinvent. And that's not easy, that's not very difficult for us to imagine several examples. And unfortunately, some of these companies have become poster childs for these. I mean, what comes to our mind? I mean, Kodak, right? People talk about Kodak and Polaroid and so on and so forth. It is not because they were not very innovative at all. By the way, I don't know how many of you know this, who invented the first digital camera? It was actually Kodak, right? They invented the first digital camera. So it's not that they did not know that digital was going to come over and take over all their film business completely away. It was their failure to sort of judge how long it will take for digital to sort of completely take over the film business. So when Kodak looked at it and said, oh, it'll take about 20 years for us to, for the digital technology to completely replace film. And then they said, yeah, so we should be there, but it's sort of, a new initiative which is on the sideline. So what happened was that the 20 years was done in less than 2 years. So the digital photography replaced the traditional film-based photography in about 2 years. And Kodak was kind of struggling to stay put as a business as well. So there are many, many examples, and we talked about, we didn't talk about it, but I was saying Blockbuster Video was another one, which completely missed the fact that there was a huge revolution which is going on in the way people watched movies, and they failed to notice it, and they went out of business pretty quickly. Barnes and Nobles, they lost out something to Amazon. Nokia and BlackBerry, which all of us know, BlackBerry pretty much invented this smartphone, well, along with another company called Trio, which also did Palm-based devices, and some of you might have used it. Shows me age clearly, right? These are technology which everybody thought was going to rule the world for several years, but they never really made it in the smartphone market, but for Apple and Samsung and so on and so forth. So I think the whole issue was for failure to notice what is needed to be successful, and assuming that their competitive advantage was sustainable and failing to reinvent in some sense. So I want to talk about the Indian IT industry that I believe has done a decent job, and I don't want to talk about companies because I get into trouble, but I want to talk about industry broadly. How the Indian IT industry has actually done a decent job of reinventing itself and sustaining its the industry's competitive advantage in some sense. Saju gave a sort of a teaser on how this worked in the companies that I worked for in the past. First of all, the IT industry in India is pretty big, right? I mean, we're talking about 8% of India's GDP today, is the IT industry. In some sense, it started with the whole notion of body shopping, if you may, right? And the core of that I'm not minimizing the capabilities, but I think the core of it was, especially for the fact that you were serving the global market, it was around what we call cost arbitrage. So the business was built around this arbitrage, which is basically the labor cost becoming a lot more affordable in one place versus the arbitrage that you could do with other places where it is, 10 times more expensive to have the same set of talent and same set of capabilities. So this is how the industry started with sort of body shopping as a broadly came around 1996, right? And some of you probably were, especially the young entrepreneurs I see way up there in the in the back of the auditorium. You probably weren't even born. I don't know. But I'm saying in 1996 there was this huge issue of. Guess what happened in 1996? People woke up to this challenge of year 2000. They felt that, oh my God, in year 2000 everything is going to go, all the computer systems will fail, and the planes are going to fall off the sky, all of that, huge panic. And I think the Indian IT industry took a little bit of an advantage of that. They reinvented, in some sense, pivoted at that moment, especially the big ones, for sure, and even some of the small ones. They said, wow, this is a great opportunity for India. We got to sort of really capitalize on this. And I still remember, and Saju talked about my stint with TCS as an organization, and then I was happened to be in the United States running one of the large set of book of business for the company at the time. And so we just completely took on this and say, okay, this is what we need to capitalize on for the next 4 years. We really going to make sure that we get every single opportunity, because corporations worldwide were panicking at that point in time. So if they don't remediate system, you understand the problem, because instead of 4-digit of the year, they only had 2-digit of the year, and of course when the year 2000 turns around, it becomes 00, and then all the hell will break loose. Let's assume that was the problem. And so the companies took advantage of the fact and then started developing solutions, which means that first of all it's a sort of a lot of hard work in terms of changing and going and doing all the dates corrections, and of course putting back the testing the program and putting back into production and whatnot. Same thing about inventing tools, if you may, to do this automatically. So lots of stuff, a lot of innovation happened, a lot of hard work happened. Business grew for the IT industry multi-fold between 96 and 2000. If you go back and look at it, everybody made a lot of business because of the fact that year 2000 was coming around. But guess what? Around 1999, end of 1999, people are also realizing that this will stop now, right? You're not going to have a year 2000 problem after 1st of January 2000, right? So you got to reinvent yourself again. So that is again, most companies didn't make it. Some companies really did a beautiful pivoting from that point onwards in terms of looking at what is next, right? It should be, people call it e-commerce, people call it client server, lots of work. And then there are many companies that, you know what? I've done this year 2000 mediation for a certain set of my customers. I'm going to stay with it and then start maintaining those applications. So application development and maintenance became a huge value proposition for companies in the IT industry. So they kind of continued with it for a little longer. I won't bore you with all the details, but I think it went on to become, people have become system integrators, developers of mission critical application, new age capabilities they developed over a period of time. And then of course, offshoot of whole ITES function that you would see and so on and so forth. So fundamentally, I think the industry was able to make this shift to digital, which is probably what the new mantra everybody's talking about, digital. I think that was because of the fact that the industry as a whole and many companies, I wouldn't say all, but many companies within the industry were able to do this reinvention of business model, process, and of course, talent as well in some sense. So when you go back and look at reinventing business model, we talked about Amazon, how they started off as books, sort of replacing Barnes and Nobles, and then today they are into pretty much everything. I don't know whether there is Amazon not being present in any of the industries that we took at, but did a pretty good job of making that pivot, making that growth, if you may. Xerox come to my mind. Xerox used to be especially in India, they were synonyms to photocopying. Actually, people said do Xerox. Right? They never said photocopy. Right? They always use the word Xerox almost as a verb here in India, right? Today Xerox still exists. They did a pivoting. If they were stayed with copying, they would have been out of business by now. But they went away from making copy machines, and today they are into document solutions. They're wonderful as a company today, but just that they're not copying business for them is probably less than 2-3% of what they do in Xerox. Right? So those are the pivoting, those are the reinvention of business models. We're talking about car companies doing, instead of selling cars, now leasing cars into renting cars and so on and so forth. So those are the business model reinvention that we have seen in the recent years. Now, the second thing I was talking about is one of the business models. Second was in terms of processes. I believe that many processes need to be digitized and automated, and look at when you want to reinvent a process, this automatically sort of leads itself to digitization, leads itself to really making some things which is very, very wonderful. I had the fortune of talking to Jacob, I believe his name is, so one of your charter members, just a while ago in the speaker's room, and he runs a chocolate company, and he was talking about how well the process change between what he does and the supply chain, which makes his delivery of chocolates to his customers around the world extremely effective. I hope, Jacob, I'm not quoting you wrong here, but please correct me if I'm wrong. But Netflix comes to my mind, and Netflix, starting with renting VCDs and video cassettes and so on, today they are into streaming devices. It's purely made possible by the fact that they reinvented the processes internally. They didn't really, wasn't a very different business model, but it was a very different process change. And today, if you look at, go back and ask Netflix, who's a really, whom are they competing against? They're actually competing against sleep. Right? Either people sleep or watch Netflix. Right? So that becomes challenging. Right? So some of us, we sort of switch on Netflix and then we go to sleep anyway. So then they're probably okay with that. But that's what they're competing against. Right? So reinventing process becomes evident. Recently, again, I was also talking to the CFO of CMO, Chief Marketing Officer of Indigo Airlines, and they have a very, very big share of the Indian domestic customers. 57%. The time I was speaking to him, 57% market share is a lot for any one airline to have. And he was saying, look, our competition is not really another airline. Our competition is actually Indian Railways. Right, IRTC, TC, whatever it is, because that's how they look at the competitive set. Suddenly becomes somebody outside of your own industry or your own familiar competition in some sense. And again, reinventing process. Airlines have done a very good job, starting all the way. And pandemic actually taught some of them to them, whether it is the self check-in or kiosk check-in or how do you deal with your backdrops and so on and so forth. I think they've really been able to bring in some of those reinvention of processes, which has made them sustainable. It's very difficult to make money in airlines, right? So they always say, how do you become a millionaire? Right? You start with being a billionaire and then start an airline, you will become a millionaire pretty soon, right? So that was the reinvention of processes in some sense. The other thing which I want to mention is that reinventing of processes also makes you resilient. Right? So one of the reasons why you reinvent process is because you want to become resilient. And going back to the pandemic example that we talked about, before the pandemic, companies were all in this rush to become extremely efficient. I mean, you've never heard people saying that, we're going to become resilient. No, it wasn't a thing. I mean, of course it was a thing, but it wasn't as important as becoming efficient. Companies around the world, especially in the United States, if you may, they wanted to make sure that supply chain was most efficient. They got the best out of it, so it's all China-based manufacturing or Taiwan-based chipset and so on and so forth. But the moment the pandemic hit us, people realized that, being efficient was great as long as it worked, but now it's no longer an option because you're no longer viable. Your products don't reach you. There is no shipment and so on and so forth. So suddenly there is a huge shift now to become resilient as an organization. So what does it mean? Do you want to bring some of the manufacturing closer home, or do you want to make sure that you have enough backup options so that you're not reliant on one country or one region or one set of suppliers and so on and so forth? I think the supply chain has gone through so much of change, and then people have become a lot more resilient. So today, if you want to ask a CEO, what do you want to pick between being efficient and being resilient, you would often find now that people are saying, I also want to be resilient. Right? Before it was always efficient. You got to have the best cost in the industry. You got to have the best margin in the industry. You got to have the best labor cost in the industry and so on and so forth. So the efficiency is kind of giving its way a little bit towards becoming resilient. And then there is another example of resiliency we see that is when the pandemic hit. Even the IT industry, for example, we are scrambling around and saying, how do you make sure that people are working from home? That was a big change for us in the industry, in IT. And so people had desktops. If you imagine the industry, we had to overnight change to laptops and so on and so forth. So that change was and I think most companies did it fairly well, sort of making this change and making sure that people were equipped to work from home. Now the problem is that we're not able to get them back into office. That's a bigger problem that, someday I hope to solve. It is really difficult for people to come back to office. So I was in our Kochi office this morning, and I was asking them, why don't people come back to office? So of course there are various excuses always as to why people don't show up to office. Now they probably need double the salary before they want to come back to office, I suppose. But we'll see that. Yeah. And there are lots of companies that changed both the business models and the process together, right? And I'm aware of a cotton processing company which actually, rather than processing cotton, the moment the pandemic hit, within 10 days, they pivoted into making swabs, the swabs they use for testing and so on and so forth. And they just did it, it just took 10 days, and they become world's largest manufacturer of swabs, which is phenomenal. And there was another company called Hula Global, Noida-based company, and then I knew the founder of that company, and they were all set for making this major designer apparel manufacturing company. They're all set to launch, and all good, and I think they probably started manufacturing within 10 days. They were hit by the pandemic. So what did they do? I mean, they could have given up. They said, well, what do we do now, right? But they pivoted into making PPE kits and masks, and then they got, within about a couple of months, they were the top selling mask company in the industry. And in Amazon, I think they were rated number 2 or number 1 or something like that for the mask. But the question is, again, this is the year 2000 movement for them, right? People have stopped wearing masks. Look at this room. I mean, nobody's wearing masks. I'm not wearing a mask. So if they continue to sell masks, well, it was a great idea 2 years ago, right? And you sold enough masks to last a lifetime. Now, what do you do now? Because you got to pivot again. So what are you going to pivot to? You want to go back to your apparel manufacturing? Or are you going to make something else? I don't know. But it is important for you to reinvent. So that's where the reinvention and sort of looking out for what really triggers those reinvention. Is it an external factor? Is it an advancement of technology? Is it some major shift in your consumer pattern? Is it a major shift in your consumer behavior? And so on and so forth. So I have like hundreds of examples. I won't go more. Maybe I'll sell one more. Homescape. I don't know how many of you know a company called Homescape. They are into co-working space, right? And then again, the same issue, right? They were, I think it's a Bangalore-based organization. And when the pandemic hit, what they did was they had a ton of these beautiful furniture they had brought for the co-working space all over the place. They were all set to launch. And they decided that, well, this is an opportunity for us to see people are going to be working from home for the next couple of years. So let's provide home offices for people, meaning so they were selling home furniture into people's homes, or work furniture into people's homes. And that's how they were able to survive and making the pivot and quite honestly reinventing themselves in some sense. Of course, we know the stories of how restaurants started, they can't serve food in the restaurant, but they started doing curbside pickup, they started doing delivery, lots of reinvention of processing. The last thing which I want to say, and then I wrap up, is talent. And I believe business model is apparent, so is processes in some sense, but the talent, and how do we really reinvent the talent, right? So based on, of course, reskilling and upskilling, etc. But I also believe that it starts from the founder or the CEO or whatever, the top dog in the organization. And your outlook as to what you need to do to reinvent is so essential. And I believe that we can talk forever on diversity, which is required on the talent piece, whether it is gender diversity, more importantly gender diversity, because we do have a serious issue with gender diversity in organizations, especially in India. I think we need to do a lot more in terms of getting the right talent, ability for people to help you reinvent in some sense. And same thing with different backgrounds, cultural diversity, and so on and so forth. And we talked about creating entrepreneurial culture within the organization, so that's going to be critical. So let me, I know I can go on a little more on the talent piece, but I want to cut it short. I know we have some questions coming, but let me close by saying, so small or big, companies need competitive advantage. Even better would be sustainable competitive advantage. And all of these forces we talked about are going to be headwinds for you when you have, or when you try to create sustainable competitive advantage. So when you have these forces, whether they are technology advancement or situations like pandemic, you're going to have issues. And one of the ways, or probably only way for you to really sustain or nullify those forces would be by reinventing your business processes, business models, processes, and talent, and making sure that you're able to respond to it. With that, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
I had a couple of relevant questions based on what you spoke, Rajesh. Especially in Kerala, a lot of the big businesses are family run, and you spoke about talent. At what stage, again, I being in HR, just wanted to ask this question. At what stage do you think the lateral talent coming into the organization could help their growth, especially when they are looking at global and expansion globally?
So, I think family-owned businesses or otherwise, companies can be very, very professional even if they are family-owned. It's a question of, in my mind at least, it's a question of having the right set of yardsticks for you to measure the performance, whether it's a family member or otherwise. Sometimes that's the only big issue with family-owned businesses. Then you kind of develop myopia, and then you, before you know, it's too late for you to change anything. But there are lots of professionally run businesses, and I believe that they continue to stay that way, and that's fine, as long as they find the right set of capabilities within the company and within the family. But it's often, as we know, it's very difficult for you to get leaders all from your own family. So, but if you're lucky to have all of them in your own family, that's fine. But I think we've always seen in the past, most family-owned business, when they want to really scale up, they do get professional help. I think that would be a right time for you to, if things are going well, I think it's fine and you continue to the way you do. But the moment you believe that you're hitting a ceiling, and if you really need to pivot into something new, if you want to reinvent yourself into a completely new business model, may not be a bad idea for you to get professional management into the companies, because that helps. And I've seen many organizations, and a great example recently, we saw, well, I don't want to name the company, but there are one of the large companies recently went out and then got some really strong professional management, and they're doing really well after that. So I think it's about those pivoting and making sure that you're finding the right moment to do that. And in my mind, the moment would be when you believe that you need to reinvent.
Thank you, Rajesh. On that note, we have a lot of young entrepreneurs also looking at startup ventures in Kerala now at this point of time. We are also hearing a lot of news around recession around the world, except for India, which is doing quite well financially. Again, the stock markets are at its all-time high, and the related metrics are all good. But then when you're considering startups and planning for a big move and investments, how do you think, what do you think your advice would be to the youngsters here with respect to their aggressive growth strategies?
So, when you look at the recession, I think, we talk about the recession in the US market. I've always believed that the recession starts with the B2C type of organization. So one of the initial indicators of recession you find is of course, not going with the definition of what a recession is, but then in the B2C segment, you'll start to see that people are not shopping as much as they do. When you look at the trend lines in terms of what really goes on in the this is a holiday season for sure. I mean, it gives you a lot of indicators as to the B2C segment. Is there a discretionary spends are getting impacted in some sense? And I believe that we're already seeing that something in the United States. In the B2B segment, you're seeing less of it. So depending on what you do as a startup, for example, or as an entrepreneur, there are lots of businesses which actually thrive during the recession. So as long as for example, all the cost takeout companies. Some of the consultants, for example, who are specializing in cost takeout, they thrive during a recession because you do need them. And the lots of automation product, for example, would thrive on a recessionary path. So depending on what you do as a startup or an entrepreneur, this would sort of vary in some sense. But as long as you understand your market, you understand your customer behavior, and then if you have a view for the next 1 year, I think that should be good enough, because you can never have a view more than 1 year, and this time and era. So it is impossible for us to say what happens in 5 years, and all of us can sit here and gaze a crystal ball. But with any amount of that, nobody would have predicted the pandemic, for example. Right? So I think we have a limited vision at this point in time. So maybe a year would be a good segment.
That's a great perspective, Rajesh. One related question when we spoke about, I'm sure you gave a lot of example with respect to Reinvent to succeed. One question around your own experience of, I've seen you transform from a programmer to an account manager to a regional manager where all of the responsibilities related to an entrepreneur was interested on you, and service delivery, business development, client relationships, financial targets for the quarter, year, and things like that. How did you transform yourself from a programmer who was sitting behind the desk, looking at a system on a daily basis, to an account manager too? And is there any learnings for the budding entrepreneurs who are here from the learnings, both good and bad? And if you have to go and rewind it, what would you do differently now? Again, obviously you've been successful across, but then some learnings to share with this group.
Oh, that's a tough one. I never thought of any of those. I don't know. Honestly, I will say that I wasn't a big dreamer, or I didn't start with a lot of ambition of sort of getting somewhere and all of that. I think I took pretty much one day at a time in many ways, and have a decent, runway of, as I said, I don't think beyond 2-3 quarters in some sense. So I think it was a focus which probably got me to do some of that, Saju. But honestly, I also worried about how I did certain things as opposed to what I did. Meaning, many times, in our industry, people get very maniacally focused on precisely what they do, but what I probably focused a little more is on how I did whatever I did. Meaning, so if I were to do a certain job, I didn't question too much as to, oh, this is a good job or a bad job. I'd rather have his job, my colleague's job, and so on and so forth. I think I kind of did, whatever I did, I tried to do my best, and then I thought focus on some of those. That has helped me quite a bit in terms of having that focus. Otherwise, just I never take myself too seriously, but I take my job very seriously. So I feel that we're all here to play a role, and so I really didn't take, as an individual, I think I'm quite easy. So have fun, and I've enjoyed what every time I'm not working, and I think that's probably gave me a little bit of an edge over many who took themselves way too seriously.
On a related note, Rajesh spoke about back to office programs and how most of the IT organizations and professional organizations are struggling to get their staff, employees back to work. Is there any advice? I'm sure a lot of the entrepreneurs here who are in the IT space are facing similar challenges for them, and what is that? Why is that organizations are pushing for their employees to come back to office? Is it not possible for them to work partly at home or mostly at home? How does it benefit the organization by getting people back into office? I remember there was an organization 15 years back when I was visiting them in the US. They were redoing their infrastructure to get back their employees into office, more of flexible work structures there. And I believe the same problem occurred 15 years back. So I just wanted your inputs on what your firm or what's your general advice here.
No, I think it's a very good question. I think today, I don't know whether it's a question of productivity. First, a lot of people say that the productivity hasn't gone down at all. But one thing which we have failed to know is that, is it productivity per hour of work? Because people tend to work longer hours when you're working from home. If you're really focused on working, some people also go for movies, that's different. But I think most of the people actually work longer hours when they're working from home. So that's number one. Number two, I believe, as large an organization, we have 260,000 people in India, 350,000 people globally. So when that level of, we are the second largest private sector company in India, and so on and so forth. So when you do some of that, if you don't have people in the office, then you don't really build the culture. What is organizational culture? At the end of the day, if you don't, it all matters as to how do you relate to your colleague, what do you do in the water cooler, how do you really talk to people over lunch. All of that actually builds an organizational culture over a period of time. And today 50% of our people haven't seen a Cognizant office. 50% of our people, because we have so much of turnover, we have a lot of attrition. With that, if you're not able to really bring them back into at least understanding what the company is here to offer, meet your colleagues, meet your team members, sort of sit together, have a cup of coffee, or go out for lunch and have a team meeting and so on and so forth, you're losing out on a lot. All of us, when we grew up, I'm sure most of us, at least the people in the front side of the row will remember, we all grew up by watching others. We had mentors in the office. We had colleagues in the office who did something, and you learned from that. You didn't learn everything from a screen, or you didn't learn everything from a book, right? So that is what is missing when you don't get people to talk. I'm not saying that I'm not even imagining that we will be back to the pre-pandemic days of working 5 days from office. That's not going to happen at all. But at least can we have 2 or 3 or 4 days, or 3 days, or 2 days, but I'll take 2 days, right? From the office, it's only because you will get the benefit that the people take back will be significant. The organization culture is going to, really rub off on them, and then as all of us benefit as a process. I think it's important, and every other industry is back in the office. Only the IT industry is dragging its feet. IT services industry, some of the product guys are already back. The IT services industry is dragging its feet, and I wish we had a magic wand, which I'll probably do that to get everybody back. Not all 5 days, but at least 2-3 days a week.
Yeah, last question for the day. Again, I think we are running out of time, and it's my favorite question to you, Rajesh. You're someone who is fun-loving, and you've been a social animal all through from what I've seen while in the US, and you go very well with clients, and people look up to you the way you were managing the affairs. At the age of 38, you became the managing director for IBM in India, and then continued to go up the ladder every 5 years. And how do you balance your work life? Again, I'm sure a lot of the entrepreneurs who are sitting here, one day you are in Singapore, the next day in Delhi, and we are so thankful that you are here in Kerala today. Obviously, you have roots in India, and I mentioned this earlier. Rajesh is in the board of OE, and he's been supporting a Kerala enterprise for the last 5 years. So he still continues his effort with the Kerala organization. So how do you balance it out, Rajesh, with all of this?
First of all, I love Kerala, and that's why I come here. I'm from Kerala. I'm very proud Malayali. But so I never grew up here, but I still want to come here all the time and visit. But to your other question of work-life balance, I think over the years, we have gotten rid of the term work-life balance, and we've replaced it with something called work-life integration. And I'll explain what it means. The days when your work and life was separate, or work and home life, or personal life was separate, is gone. You no longer look at it that way. I mean, there were days when I remember when my parents' days, and they would go to work at morning, 9 o'clock or whatever, work during the day, come back home at 5 o'clock, and then you're done. And then from 5 to the next day morning, 9 o'clock, it's your personal life. That is no longer an option for any of us in this room, is it? So what we are doing now is work-life integration, which means that you could do work or personal stuff that you need to do at any time of the day, and that's okay, right? And I'll give you an example. I used to run an entity in Singapore for a long period of time, and my CFO was from Japan. And we were a US-based organization, so we had lots of calls in the evenings, lots of calls in the mornings, depending on which coast that we are talking to, maybe the East Coast and West Coast and so on and so forth. Usually our day was in Singapore at such a bad time zone. During the day, nothing much happens. All the action starts at 6 p.m. and goes on till midnight sometimes, or maybe in the morning it starts again. And I remember sitting in the office one day about doing personal stuff during the day. Why? I mean, as long as you're able to deliver what you need to deliver, I wouldn't have a problem at all, going for shopping, for example, at 2 p.m. in the afternoon on the middle of a work day, as long as you know that you're delivering what you need to deliver, right? I mean, as long as you know that you worked 15 hours a day the previous day and so on and so forth. So I think integrating your work and your personal life would probably be a better approach, and you'll be happier that way than trying to sort of balance your work and personal life.
So with that, thank you so much, Rajesh, for being here with us. We traveled all the way from Delhi for this 1 hour, half an hour effort, but then we're truly honored to have you here.
Develop not just competitive advantage, but sustainable competitive advantage to drawing a distinction between work-life balance and work-life integration. Those are two different but pertinent distinctions. Thank you very much, sirs. Thank you, the host, for steering the conversation forward. Thank you.